a check. Can you hear me in the back? Am I speaking loudly enough? And I'll ask you if I or anybody else gets a little bit too low, give me the signal and I'll remind you. Our agenda today is primarily going to be devoted to the second touch on the goals and objectives that we heard last time in public work on, and then the first touch on best available science. We will do an update on a couple of our process issues, the open meetings, the technical committee for observation, and the funding and governance committee had its first meeting. Before we get started into the agenda, let's do introductions here at the front table so everybody knows who's here, and for the record in our minutes and a camera, right? Neil, you and Julie is taking a nice picture of your back of your head. You're so FYI.
He's got a haircut too.
Yeah,
Perfect timing.
And hers is great too.
no.
So over here with Bill.
Bill McGregor, Port of Olympia Commissioner.
Jeff Dickinson, Squawks Mountain Pride.
Cheryl Selby, City of Olympia.
Julie Hankins, City of Olympia.
And welcome, Julie.
I just
thank
didn't
you.
want to introduce her now formally,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'd like to, introduce everybody and welcome my +1 at the Proviso dance, Councilmember Julie Hankins.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Neil McClanahan, City of Tumwater.
Chris Lee, Director for DES.
Kathy Wolf, Houston County.
Keith Kamat, Tumwater Mayor.
Covington, Deputy Director of Enterprise Services.
And Paul Janczyk, facilitator for these meetings.
Jesse Messinger, Floyd Slater.
So, before we jump into the content of the meeting, let's do a check on minutes. They were sent out ahead of time. What we do here is I hope that you send any changes you had wanted, but this is a last check. If there are no changes, we'll then take them as the minutes of the meeting and they'll be posted as such. I believe, Carrie, they are already posted as draft, is that right? So the public has seen them, but they aren't yet designated as our final. Were there any changes that you feel we needed to make? Then we'll accept those as the final minutes. And we'll move into our second touch on goals and objectives.
Perfect. Good morning. I'm going to walk through, and what's in your packet are the revised materials from last month. Those that have evolved with the input we received from you guys, the technical committee, and the community. And I really want to spend a little bit of time going through the results of the online survey that was submitted as part of these materials in April. And that was a 2-week survey where we solicited information from folks around goals. So we'll do that, getting the input from you guys. I want to relay how that comes into the Proviso report, the element that comes up next month around that, and then we'll get into best available science. So what's on the screen right now is our figure 1, which is a timeline of the Capitol Lake related events. We brought this forward in April. From the technical committee, the executive work group, and the community, we got good information back on a handful of events to bring and incorporate into this graphic. And some of those we have, and others will be captured in the text of the Proviso report that accompanies this. In part, just for a balance of how much we could fit on a figure. So what we added, to give you a sense of this, are 3 items. So if I'm starting chronologically from the left, there is now a 1971 to 1999 a summer lake drawdown and back flushing to control algal bloom and freshwater plant growth. So we added that. Then in 1996, so this is in red at the bottom, we added the connections around the permitting efforts for construction of Heritage Park, and that they began to highlight the need for adaptive management and start the Capitol Lake cleanup process, or kind of the origin of that. Then we also added 2004, so now you're in blue above the kind of middle gray arrow. In blue 2004, a herbicide is applied to Capitol Lake as part of a research effort intended to control milfoil. We also heard input around the value of documenting the water quality treatments that have been done. It just was something we felt like was right on the verge of how much we could put on the figure and how much we try to document all of the related efforts. So we'll capture that in the Proviso report text. Also, we had input from the community around recommendations were coming out of that process. That's something that will be in the text in the proviso report, but we didn't per se capture on the figure. So kind of focused additions. This figure will be in the proviso report. We feel like it provides good context to kind of the evolution and history of the lake in a snapshot. Any questions on that for now?
Good job.
Okay. Okay. So this one's pretty cool to talk about. It's dense, but let me tell you and explain why. So we had the online survey for 2 weeks in April. It received over 421 survey responses, which was really great. So we were really pleased with folks just taking the time to do that and demonstrating their engagement. We also received 346 written comments that came with the survey. So the survey asked folks to say what are the most important goals, and please tell us your top 5 so we could get a sense of priority. And then we also provided other or please tell us provide information. So we had over 30 pages of comments too. So what you'll see on the upper left of this figure is in a similar fashion to how we were showing last month the 1999 EIS and the 2009 plant results of public input. We have these kind of histograms or bar charts, and it shows relative order of magnitude of survey responses. So what you can see is that the top 6 goals were consistent in 2016 in this process as they were in 2009, and really even 1999, but the order of those top 6 have shifted. So we had aesthetics, sediment management, recreational opportunities, water quality, economically feasible and reasonable, and habitat restoration. In addition to that, one of the things that was really great input from the community meeting that was at the end of April is folks said, gosh, when you say something like aesthetics or salmon recovery, I don't know how you're defining that. I don't know what you mean by that. So there are 2 things we wanted to do. We kind of talked through what we meant by that, but we also then wanted to make sure that we kind of married up the written comments we got from folks with their survey response so that all of the text you're seeing are examples of what the community included in their survey response. And we wanted to show a representative range of what folks said. So, for example, for aesthetics, the one individual had said the lake has been a beautiful asset and icon for the city. And they're voting for aesthetics being something important for a long-term goal as someone that would be pro-lake, would like to see it maintain a lake. Similarly, someone that voted for aesthetics said, please note that I find the natural estuary to be aesthetically pleasing. So what we just did is capture examples of what folks meant when they voted a certain way so that we understood that and have that in the right context. And what I want to do is dovetail the technical committee input we received on these materials as we go through them. It seems to make the most sense. So the technical committee didn't have specific comments on figure 1 that we looked at. On this figure, what they had recommended was when we put examples under each of these goals, headers, aesthetics, sediment management, more often than not, the first bullet is showing someone that might be supportive of a lake, and the second bullet is someone supportive of an estuary. And we always did that kind of consistently, and they said we should mix it up so that it doesn't show a bias or preference one way or the other. So that's something that we will do. And then the last point, and they had a question as well, when you see certain headers and we have just one bullet for sea level rise, for example, that was because there was really only one comment that was provided in addition to their survey result on that topic. So many people voted sea level rise being important to them, but maybe there was only one text comment on that. Yeah, so that overall is figure 2C. I did want to provide a little bit of more information on the survey results. Let's see. So aside from input where folks were saying, as some of these examples showed, they were interested in a specific long-term option. The other kind of themes we definitely saw were, again, around recreation, restoring and enhancing recreational opportunities. Various folks commented on cost. comments ranging from evaluating long-term maintenance costs to reducing potential economic impacts to the local community. Various folks, or a reoccurring theme was around sediment management, regardless of what option someone may have preferred. The public's very attuned to the fact that all options should carefully consider sediment management as a key component. The other themes I think that are good for us, specifically when we get into the best available science, is there were a handful of commenters that noted real science should be used to guide decisions, or that they support a scientific approach to choosing a management plan. A number of comments focused on garnering broad community engagement and continuing to engage the community throughout the process. And then finally, and nearly most prominently, we saw that there was an increased sense of urgency about taking an action. That regardless if people had difference of opinion on what long-term option they wanted, that they want to see this move forward, that we need to get into the next phase and be able to take an action. So some of the examples were the subject has been studied and discussed to death. The community is tired of spending money to study the same topics over and over again. There were various elements and comments along those lines. Let's get something done, things like that. So that was an overview of the survey responses and the community input we've received. Any questions on that?
I guess I'm wondering what the purpose of this document will be, because there are some representations on here. I understand their public perceptions, people contributed them. Nonetheless, there are some perceptions on here that are just demonstrably false or inaccurate. So I want to make sure we're not documenting things that people subsequently take as true because they're here.
No, it's a great question. A good example that maybe one that you caught too is one of the comments is stating that the tidal exchange in an estuary would completely eliminate or remove invasive species. That is not actually accurate. WDFW has, written to that effect that, for example, the New Zealand mud snail can persist in an estuary environment. So there's definitely a mix of misconceptions about some of these, or the technical underpinnings that start to get detailed but are important to people's understanding. So in terms of each statement, if it is a perception or someone's interpretation of something, that doesn't become a driving force as we move forward. The best available science work really is what we use to, and when we get into the methodology, that's what we use to say, okay, we need to have credible, reliable, valid science that we base our decisions on and we inform our decisions. When we have opinions or input from the public or stakeholders that may not meet the best available science criteria that we'll go through, they can be used to supplement. So one of the examples that one of our options gives is if someone says, I've seen a grizzly bear in the area. Well, that's not a scientific study, but that does help you to know that bears inhabit the area. That's one of the examples they have. So I think we want to document this as part of the process. It helps us understand where people are at, but we are still relying on our valid and available technical information that we have to guide this process and ultimately guide phase 2 of the EIS.
Jeff, do you have any other thoughts?
Well, I don't know that, I understand your explanation. I don't know that that's adequate in the context of what I'm asking. It seems like we probably should put some kind of statement on here that these opinions do not represent any scientific consensus or finding a fact or
And
whatever.
unedited as received as well. We didn't edit or adjust when we have the language. We show quotes to represent that, but we can definitely put in kind of disclaimer statement.
Anybody have a?
I was just gonna suggest that too. I think some kind of disclaimer, these do not necessarily represent the views of, but they are simply responsive to the survey, or whatever wording you want to use, but I think that it's fine with the other idea.
Any other thoughts, Bill, about that?
I think I could support both points of view. I mean, it is unedited, we're not asking for backup or scientific study behind some, they are really opinions.
Any concern about doing that? Thank you, Jeff. Other questions, thoughts? Should I hear you? Anything else then about this survey page? There you go.
So the next item for a second touch on goals, and then this will be the last item for goals, is figure 3, the blue and yellow circles. And then from this, I want to explain how we are using all this information, and the last piece of goals that will come to you next month in June. Thank you for the reminder. Okay. Some of the input we received, a lot of the discussion with the community, the technical committee, or the executives got into, are you a lumper or a splitter? How much do you group things versus do you pull out in detail? So what we've done is make sure on the left in blue, we are in the splitter category and identifying every element of a reoccurring goal. So an example of that would be if you're saying improve fish and wildlife habitat, like we are in yellow, technically that can include supporting healthy salmon runs because you're looking at fish and wildlife habitat. So on the blue, we've got goals from existing project documentation. Then that comes into primary things. Initially, we had environment, infrastructure, and community. We were kind of binning economics with community. The feedback was to really make that more prevalent or prominent and pull that out. And then goals for long-term management. This is where really kind of the meat of this is and how we use the information. The yellow circles represent stakeholder input, the process we did in April with all of the meetings. Some of it gets into verbiage and terminology. Other things really get into how do you lump or what is of most important from various perspectives, from recreation and community use to agencies and looking at how to manage a resource and our requirements to meet federal or state law and standards. So from the technical committee, we reviewed this with them last week on Thursday. They had some additional input and changes to terminology. To hit just a couple to give you a sense, it wasn't anything too major. But when we're saying in yellow, recover healthy salmon runs, they recommended support healthy salmon runs. Instead of maintain aesthetics and visual quality, its support is better because, again, like what we heard in the survey from the community, that means different things to different people, whether it's maintaining a lake or it is moving towards an estuary. So again, we want to recognize both viewpoints. Similarly, supporting historical and cultural resources. We talked about for the economics, the lower left yellow circle, avoid negative economic impacts or maximize the economic benefits, things like that. So what we also did out of the input from folks is that we added the symbology. You'll see that our circles, triangles, and squares trying to communicate what are some of the directives out of the proviso versus requirements for federal law or Washington State water quality standards, and also ecosystem recovery targets.
So those are the coded little markers inside the circle.
Inside the yellow circles. Out of this, what we have done, and we mentioned this last month, is that we've drafted a draft purpose and need statement, also under SEPA called a problem statement. And it really is the statement that says, why are we doing a project? What is broke? What are we trying to fix? Or what's the goal of the work? So in an EIS process, which phase 2 is what we all want to get into, is get into an EIS process so we can take action. That's what you compare different long-term management options against. Are you meeting the goal of the purpose and need? It's also when you get to what this process is calling phase 3, where you're looking to secure permits, it's what you put in your permit application of why you are doing this project. So we've drafted that, we're finalizing it with DES, and that comes forward to the technical committee, the executive work group, and the public next month in June. That'll be in time for us. Next month, we bring forward a summary of the identified hybrid options. And so we wanted to flesh that out completely and bring that forward to get input to support when we are looking at options. So that's how we're using this, is to draft that language. Ultimately, what would be wonderful is through June and into July, we collectively, technical executive community, come to a consensus around that narrative, that purpose and need. That comes into the proviso report, and then that is ready and kind of that foundation of the phase 2 EIS that we would move into. It ends up kind of the heart of that. Any questions on this one or input?
Questions, thoughts?
Could you review again the edits to the circles?
Yes. Some from the straight from April, or what the technical committee gave us feedback on last week, or a little bit of a mix?
The changes that you're proposing today.
Got it. The changes that we heard, if I start, let's see, for recover healthy salmon runs, recover would be replaced with support.
It's over on the laptop.
If we move our way down, where we have aesthetics and visual quality, maintain would also be replaced with support. Similarly, to the right of that, maintain would be replaced with support historical and cultural resources. And then at the bottom on the left, we say avoid economic impacts, but the feedback was we need to have additional clarity about avoid negative impacts and maximize economic benefits. So that kind of goes hand in hand with negative impacts and thinking about the cost effectiveness of an action, but also how do you maximize the economic benefit to the community and the economy in the area.
Questions?
I was just going
Okay,
to,
some more.
just one. We all kind of recognize that, and I use this example, having a goal of improved fish and wildlife habitat really does also, or can include, support healthy salmon runs. Sometimes there's it's an umbrella that includes a few things. So just for what it's worth.
When do you want feedback from us on those changes?
Perfect, great question. These materials, just like last month, are now publicly available for a 2-week public comment period. And if you can provide input within those 2 weeks, that would be great. Then we're able to, is that June 2nd? 2 weeks from last Thursday. So 2 weeks from the 19th. There we go, June 2nd. Any input would be great, and then we'll accommodate and bring that into what comes into the proviso report. So you can feel assured that these 3 figures, 1, 2C, and 3, you won't have to look at them again at this table. They won't come back.
Are there any thoughts or reactions to those changes, or otherwise this document? Well, we have it once.
Yeah, just want to, on all of these where it says improve, I think support, you might want to add to all of them, because not only do we want to improve it, but then once we've done that work, we want to continue to support it so that it goes into the future.
I mean, I guess I look at it just the opposite. To me, support doesn't really mean a whole lot. I mean,
It's
isn't
not
that
strong
to
enough.
improve things here?
I guess I was looking at if we, like, in taking into stray sediment management, we can improve it, but if we don't continue to have a plan to support it into the future, that's where I was coming from. So if there's a different way of saying that.
Reactions, thoughts on that? Suggestion is that where we see on here improve, which is a point in time now,
Right.
it would be the goal of a management plan to reach a certain point.
Right,
Then there's perspective of what's a long-term management goal
beyond that.
beyond that. So
Or is that not that might not be the intent of this at all, but.
This is goals for long term.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to have it be improve and support. You know, because it also, there's some elements where, you know, we say improve recreational opportunity, because overall, I think people, regardless of what they see the future of the lake being, want them to be improved. What's
Right.
currently there is not being removed, so,
Well, I know, for example, in salmon, it's more than support. The idea is to improve the return. I think
Yeah.
That's what the fishery's all about. That's why they're improving, they're moving ahead with some major capital improvements there. So support isn't the right word.
What about improve and support?
Yeah, that's,
I suppose that would help, yeah. In sediment management, there is no sediment management, so I guess improve.
to improve it, but then once it gets going, I don't want it to not continue once we start, if we improve it, I don't want it to get dropped.
Yeah.
That's where I'm trying to find that word that would,
And then, I mean, the same thing with aesthetics. I don't think anybody would argue that the current aesthetics are frankly all that desirable.
yeah, that's why we struck maintain, that makes
Seems like
us
improve
improve
the,
it.
I guess it's a value judgment as to what that means, but,
So, other than the table, we haven't thought about, it sounds like improve and support is the direction several of you suggested, and Pete is still pondering.
yeah, I think it depends on the context, but, yeah, for the most part, I think if you have to improve, you know,
yeah.
Yep. Those nodding, any other thoughts you'd like to express on that? Chris, anybody have a concern about that? Not heard about all of them, obviously, but a fair number of them, that's the direction you take. Okay.
So one question I would like to ask your guys' opinion on what you want to see next month is that next month that draft purpose and need statement will be coming to you. One thing that we've compiled, it's nothing fancy, it's a Word doc where we have pulled an example or a range of examples of purpose and need statements from other projects that have been through an EIS process, permitted and constructed. And my intent there was the thought that it might help folks have context that aren't used to looking at purpose and need statements to see the range where some of them are very small and linear, 3 sentences. Other ones are a little more to it because they say this is a collaborative project or it was informed by resource agencies, or they can come in many forms. Really, I've had projects where it's 3 sentences, and then ones where it's a page with sub-bullets and additional secondary goals. So do you guys think next month it would be helpful before, as we show you the draft purpose and need for Capital A, to just really briefly walk through a range of examples? Or do you feel like you already kind of would have your mindset there?
I think it's going to be very difficult to take all of this stuff in yellow dots and reduce it down to a succinct statement.
You would be right.
That's why he's mayor.
No, you're exactly right, but I don't want to, we drafted it, I feel like it's gotten to a really great place.
Okay.
So I like it, and I think we're trying to be very mindful of having it have the depth that it needs to encompass all of this, but not, like, also you have to look down the road to say, if I was evaluating a range of options, I don't want to preclude any of them by the way I'm phrasing this. So that's where some of these words that I know are driving people just bananas, you know, of do you use maintain, do you use this, can have meaning when you're looking at how you compare options. So, yeah, it is.
So, seeing examples of what other folks have done and sort of your thought process to get to where you were, I think would be helpful. Because again, I think this is not an easy thing to do.
No. And if you're not used to looking at them too, I think it's helpful to have the context of, in the purpose and need, you don't have to say every single thing that that project will accomplish. You need to have the right size umbrella to hold it all, you know, to cover it. But we don't necessarily, you know, have to, if a goal is, you know, improve infrastructure, one of the ones that's come up in the past, the purpose and need doesn't have to exactly say improve infrastructure. That's something that is part of the EIS, but it needs to make sure it can kind of hold all of that. So, Does anyone else, that sounds okay to bring forward examples just to provide that context?
I think bringing forth examples is a good thing, you know, those of us who have the experience already don't necessarily have to go through it, but those of us who may not be as well versed, it could be a great benefit.
Okay.
You're talking about examples of other people's purposes, not.
Right.
Yeah, they're from other projects that made its way through an EIS. They made it through agency review and permitting and are in construction or have been constructed. And some of them are, from straightforward to more complex, kind of to get the feel for it. Okay. We'll do it.
Yeah, I would like to see that. So we're working on the second touch on goals and objectives. You think you have it presented yet?
No, that's it. That's it for this one. We're putting our first proviso element topic to bed.
So we're kind of finishing our second touch on this. Other than if anybody does have any further thought about the language of the yellow, they'll get it in, and if so, we probably will be back around everybody, let them know where we can come in as a comment. But this is our first time through the first and second touch piece, so I just want to know it and solve it, but make sure we know where we are on it. Okay? So as we leave that, let me say something I should have said earlier, which is this is actually an extended meeting today. I said our agenda for the morning, our usual. But remind us that we do have an extended meeting, and we have an agenda in the packet of our community, first of 2 days of community presentations, a couple hours. We'll take a short lunch break. Lunch will be available in the room for the executive work group members. Folks from the here as observers are welcome to have your lunch, go get some lunch, and come and take that break and join us. We'll have a 2-hour primarily presentations for 4 folks with some opportunity for questions and answers. And with that, we then move on to our first touch on best available science and overview of feedback from the technical.
And I'm just going to read in that feedback from the technical committee as I hit each piece. Let's see, so let's start off with just reminding us all with what the proviso charged us with best available science. And then the DES work plan also has components of our work that we're doing around this topic to get there and support that. So the proviso charged us with identifying and summarizing best available science for water quality and habitat relative to conceptual options of retaining or removing the dam. The DES work plan in support of that looked to develop criteria and a process to look at the science and provide the opportunity for folks with new information to present on it. So that's part of the origin of today. The extended schedule is an opportunity for folks to share the information that they have. It's opened up, so it's not just about science, it's about other relevant pieces of history or economy or options as well. What we've done then to meet those goals is we did quite a bit of research looking at different criteria or methods to identify best available science. And what I want to start with is, it's a different PDF. Hold this one sec. Is this guy. So it should be the figure methodologies to review best available science. On the top is a summary one. In the upper left is an example definition for best available science. Because again, not everyone's used to looking at this. In this federal definition, the term best available science means that A, maximizes the quality of objectivity and integrity of information, including statistical information. B, uses peer-reviewed and publicly available data. And C, clearly documents and communicates risks and uncertainties in the scientific basis for such projects. So in our research looking at various methods, we landed on 3 options that we're bringing forward. Oh, that's very tiny.
There it is.
Do you have a larger one?
Yeah, you want to look at
Is there one in this packet, and a larger one in this packet? Okay,
Yes.
here's the one I got the other days.
Do you have?
I don't have that one.
Do you have a large one?
That would be great if that's okay.
Here.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Some mini magnifiers, all mini magnifiers. Thank you.
So, part of our process of determining which three we bring forward to you guys today to discuss and review, and also what we brought forward to the technical committee, because really those folks that have that technical expertise and kind of look at these criterias or questions on a day-to-day basis, we really wanted to solicit their input. So part of our process was what is on the lower left. Do you have what you need?
Well, it's just a smaller version, but I don't care, I've got my magnifier. I don't care. I mean, and that's just not monumental, but.
No,
Yeah, fine.
I'll give you the no. Yeah.
Just what it's in here, so it's the packet, I think.
Oh, there we go, yeah, okay. All right, so we landed on three. Three is what we brought forward last Thursday to the technical committee and what we'll talk about today. On the lower left of this figure, though, this is how we reached the selection of the three to come forward. We wanted to look at state, federal, and international methods that are widely used and accepted on each of those levels or structures. We wanted to focus in methods that are suitable for reviewing environmental data. So this purpose in the future EIS, but also what the proviso charged us with is looking at water quality and habitat data. We wanted to confirm that they are commonly used and reflected current best practice. And then the last thing was confirming that the methods are provided in formal guidance or codified in law or in peer-reviewed literature. So we didn't want, a master's thesis from 20 years ago where someone did a lower approach but it has never been tried and tested. We really wanted something that's been implemented and practiced so we were able to understand how people have put it to use on other systems or other projects. I just want to say at the bottom of this figure, there's a source box that has the detailed sources of the three we'll cover today, and they're also available on DES's website in their full form. So when we walk through the graphics we prepared to be able to help folks understand it, the whole document and source is available in case people wanted to learn more about it or look into additional detail. All right, so on the right side of this figure then are the three that we're going to go into a little bit more detail together. We have a Washington State criteria for identifying best available science. It's included in the WACT under the Growth Management Act. And I'm just going to hit on these bullets because it's our kind of high-level summary, and then we'll go in a little bit deeper. It provides criteria to assist in determining whether information constitutes as best available science. It has general indications of characteristics of a valid scientific process. It's in a table format that we'll get to. It's what's used pretty commonly and required by Washington State counties and cities when they are looking at science and adopting new policies or regulations around critical areas, so specifically for review of environmental data. And Ecology and WDFW have used this approach in the WAC when they're reviewing literature relevant to their management of wetlands and environmentally critical areas in the state. We also have an EPA federal guideline. This is a different setup. Instead of a tabular form with scientific characteristics, it has 5 general assessment factors. It establishes a minimum review and documentation requirements for assessing and accepting data from other organizations or entities outside of EPA. And it's what they look at. They also make sure it complies with their own agency's formal informational quality guidelines. And they use it to review science and technical information to support their decision making. So it's broad reaching in that from EPA's purview that can be a lot of different types of projects, whether it's a cleanup project or Clean Water Act, there's kind of a range, or habitat restoration. And then in the bottom, the blue is an internationally recognized scoring system. So we bring this forward, it's an international system, but it's been used quite often, and it's a basis that other methods have grown from. So it met the requirements around it being commonly used, published, peer-reviewed journal articles, and so forth. It's a little bit different. So the first Washington State's a tabular form. EPA is more of a kind of narrative with 5 assessment factors, and the international system is a scoring or ranking system where you would look at a technical study or report and you would give it a score from 1 to 4, and we'll kind of touch on that. It It also suggests a written justification that accompanies the scoring or codes. It's intended to have consistency or continuity when you're looking at evaluating data internationally from different sources. And it's most commonly used in risk assessments when they're evaluating if data are complete and valid and have used current standards. So those are the three that we brought forward. And as we touch on them a little bit more, I'll relay input from the technical committee. So the next graphic should say Washington State criteria for best available science. And looks like that guy. Excuse me. Okay, so there is a lovely table in the WAC Growth Management Act. We've just kind of jazzed it up a little bit in all of these to make it more pleasing to look at and also just easier to communicate and show. This is the tabular kind of system where on the left side, y-axis, you're looking at sources of scientific information evaluated. So you would be looking at a technical study or report data that's either research, monitoring data, inventory data. That could be around a habitat project, a population, ecosystem area, survey data, modeling, assessment, a synthesis, or an expert opinion. And across the top, you're looking at the characteristics. Is this source of scientific information, is it peer reviewed? What do we know about the methods? Are there logical conclusions and reasonable inferences? Is there a quantitative analysis, a statistical assessment of the data? Does it have proper context with assumptions and conclusions and the references? So what the marks mean is if you see a blue check, it's a characteristic that must be present for the information to be considered scientifically valid and reliable. The orange, which is really around having a statistical or quantitative method assessment, is a step above that, even better relative to its validity. So a couple of things here that we thought was helpful around this, and then I'll relay the technical community input. The criteria, one thing to touch on at the bottom under expert opinion, the criteria includes guidance on determining if a person is qualified as a scientific expert. It also acknowledges that there could be technical studies or data that don't necessarily meet the characteristics for validity or reliability under the scientific evaluation, but that they can be helpful as supplemental information to that science that you found is scientifically valid and will support your process. And even though it's supplemental, it can't substitute and replace what comes through this and is identified as scientifically valid and credible. The technical committee input on this, a number of folks, and particularly with ecology folks, they were familiar with this methodology being a state method and have implemented themselves and have found it to be relatively straightforward, objective, and have used it to apply to environmental data like we would with all of the technical studies around water quality and habitat for Capitol Lake. And then we'll get into their comments on the EPA level. Ecology also is bringing forward and supporting the process by sharing their peer review categories and what they've developed and used for that, so we can augment and bring this in. So this is the state level. And overall, the technical committee had provided initial support of the state methodology, and that in their opinion, if we were asking to identify which of the three makes the most sense for a phase 2 EIS and a review of scientific information, it was the WAC, it was the state level.
Are there any questions on the first one? Just understand. Let's clarify.
Okay.
Well, I guess the question one of the questions I had was looking at some of the goal statements, things like cost or history, it's exactly science or example. So is this There's no definition of science, I guess. You just sort of make that assumption.
In the WAC itself, or how you would use this in an agenda? Because you're right, the WAC itself doesn't define best available science, but it would infer that if you could take the technical document and review it with this method, it would be deemed credible science or not. But your point around, what about the elements that aren't directly science, like cost, things of that nature? They, in the alternative analysis that is comparing those, they factor in, but we don't have to use a best available science approach to make sense of it. That when we get into a conceptual design in the EIS, we're able to then assign cost to each option and understand what that means.
So I don't know whether this helps or not, but in terms of the proviso directs what the science is about. It says, findings of best available science concerning water quality and habitat as they relate to conceptual options of retaining or removing dam has a pretty focused application.
So is that the intent of these criteria to focus on that?
And this process, yes, when we get to a compiled list of technical documents that are available, we focused on water quality and habitat. They're pretty large buckets, so they encompass a lot of the issues that would be in the EIS, but the EIS process of looking at impacts would go a bit larger. So for example, in the EIS process, it will need to identify what is the current state of water quality, what would be the impact of water quality on each of the options that are being evaluated. But there's also an assessment of climate change and sea level rise and things like that that maybe the proviso hasn't explicitly stated, but that would be reviewed and assessed in the EIS process.
So maybe if there's a statement added that says this methodology would be used to, what were the words that we used to evaluate?
Oh, we have that on top of the technical or the compiled list, but we could.
Water quality and habitat as they relate to conceptual options of retaining or removing dam.
And that'll definitely be in the proviso report. So in the proviso report, there will be, each proviso element topic we have every month has a section of the report where we describe what the directive was from the proviso and how we envision this being used, and then would show which method there was consensus around of being most applicable or appropriate.
I guess I was trying to understand better what's being evaluated, because not everything is science.
That's right.
So I think somehow describing what, in general, what
Okay.
this is going to be used for.
And is that how you, I'm going to turn it back to you, is that how you would want to use this? So for example, recreational opportunities or aesthetics are considerations, but wouldn't necessarily, somebody's presenting a paper or a survey or something on that, wouldn't necessarily be subject to this, a chosen criteria, is that right?
But they would be part of the SEPA review process that would
That's part of SEPA.
Yeah, SEPA requires.
But in terms of saying what's best available science, I guess I'm posing it back to the group. Do you see the best available science primarily as consistent with the water quality and habitat that really as advisor says?
Yeah, it seems that's the most relevant use of this information. I mean, as long as we're clear what it's.
Or, I just have a question. Would there ever be a time we'd use it in recreation? I mean, I'm trying to think of a scenario where, is there available science you need to say boats can come in and out of that water body and not transfer microorganisms or something, or not? Is that?
No, and often in an EIS process, in the EIS, there's often part of that work that the project proponent and their team does is to look at science and figure out what's the most recent and what gives me the most information that's appropriate around fish migration and how my construction may impact that, right? But there typically isn't a clear, I use this method to determine that. Like, we're going kind of a step above to say, we're going to use this method to identify best available science, and we went through it and could show the results. Where a lot of the EIS is behind the scenes, they're doing that. They are looking at figuring out what is this paper's older, this one has advanced, and now we know more. They just don't have a firm method that they identify. So definitely all of the options in the EIS process get compared, and when they get compared or evaluated, there's predetermined or predefined categories where we have to look at recreation or impacts and benefits, cost, long-term cost, climate change, community support, cultural, historical impact. All those categories are there. This is just having a defined framework in which, when we've got a system that has a mix of technical information, it helps you say, I'm going to figure out what is most valid in this way.
So, but to get back to what Pete was saying, you wouldn't necessarily use it on like the historical and cultural, I mean, some of those. And so, as long as everybody's okay with that, when you.
That's how we're checking, understanding if it has a focus on the water quality and habitat primarily.
But that it could be used if you need it somewhere else, is that?
Yeah, I think it would, because, yeah, just need to figure out what.
Right. I think that's a good point. We don't want to raise expectations if
Is that
somebody's going to say
understanding,
that.
Sharon? Primarily water quality, this is focused on water quality and habitat. That's federal science and the criteria to select. Jeff, what do you think?
Would you use it on invasive species? Or is that a water quality issue? I think it maybe, it's just saying water quality and habitat may be a little restrictive of some of the goals we have relative to scientific basis.
And when we get to, when we go through the methods, then we have the compiled document list. And so the proviso just says water quality and habitat. But again, what we heard in April was a simple term like that could mean so many things. So at the top of our compiled technical document list, we define what we are including in that term, and that habitat is inclusive of, so technical studies and habitat is inclusive of habitat for fish, wildlife, and other aquatic organisms, and includes other information relevant to habitat, such as invasive species. So our compiled technical document list includes invasive species in that.
So, now I'm understanding, so your second box, go back a slide. That's where you're saying it's going to be used in the lower left.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, in the EIS process, there isn't a proviso directive. So if there were conflicting or a mix of information on a certain topic, by all means, this would be used or opened up to any topic that is necessary or needed. And we can, maybe we'll just do better language on that graphic. It'll definitely be defined in the proviso report that reflects that our compiled technical document list is focused on water quality and habitat. We'll go through what that is and how we define it, but that this could be used for any scientific review of scientific information in the EIS.
Particularly environmental data. That's the refer back to here, such as water quality and habitat. But that is invasive species. If I'm following you, Jesse, a consideration of maximizing economic benefits would naturally fall under that.
Yeah.
But in a SEPA review, if the review wanted to put a test to what different studies were it could, but that would not be the intent here.
Yeah.
This would be directed primarily at environmental related data.
And in this process, and with time too, we're just focusing on the water and water quality and habitat in a broad definition, but in our compiled document list.
Is that making sense? Is that making sense to everybody? Pete, back to you. Push this on the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this is the first touch.
Can strengthen that.
Coming back in the second touch, look at how that's expressed and served.
So we'll touch on these next two. Okay. So the next one, EPA guidance for evaluating the quality of scientific information. So EPA's method has these 5 general assessment factors: soundness, applicability and utility, clarity and completeness, uncertainty and variability, and evaluation and review. And then in each factor or category, there's a handful of questions that then the reviewer answers. We did not edit any of this text, so it's a dense figure, but this was a much easier way to present it than for you to get the guidance document and read it. And this one, the technical committee said that in their mind, and this is from ecology folks that have looked at this, it's a little bit challenging, or a potential weakness is that there's some introduction of subjectivity in the scoring and answering questions. It's not as much as does it meet this, I can check this, as much as someone applies judgment to an answer to each of these questions and how they may review or feel the data meets that need. They also said, the WAC method provides kind of clear information and a category or characteristic around peer review that this doesn't necessarily do. So I think that was part of an overall consensus from the technical committee that, again, the WAC was more appropriate for the review of our environmental data and this context in which it would be used. But that's EPA's.
Any questions?
And then our international one, it's a little bit different approach. So this is, as I mentioned, scoring or ranking. So the reviewer would review the scientific information or technical study, and they would give it a code based on its credibility or robustness. One being a better score, or it's met more of the scientific credibility, reliability, and 4 being a lower score. So for example, there's not a lot of information. There's a short abstract available or only secondary literature review. Different groups have expanded upon this framework to what you see on the right, so that if you have a code 1, you would look, and now the expanded, which is over here in green, reliable without restriction, and they said, okay, 1A is a good laboratory practice guideline study, 1B comparable to guideline study, and they kind of provide a little bit more guidance. This is largely used, and you can see by this expansion of the justification codes, for toxicology and review of the material going into that. We brought it forward because it is used so commonly and so frequently in the review of environmental data. And again, overall, the technical committee, like us, said we haven't had experience with the international method, but given that it's a ranking system and tying back to already the use of the WAC for environmental data and cities and counties, the WAC was kind of seeming to make the most sense. And this is a peer-reviewed journal article, and that's again available on DES's website for their original source. It's just a little bit dry, so I'm trying to make it a little more appealing.
So on the final one, I can see that a article or study gets a rating of 1, 2, 3, or 4, and some of those ratings then means it's probably not used in the review, or wait, whatever. How does that work on the other two?
This is just personally speaking for myself. What I liked about the WAC method is that, you could have a whole range, and I think if let's say, a scientific study or report for someone, you would review this and it would come out saying this is scientifically valid and reliable. Yes, we will use this to inform our assessment of water quality. Or it would come out of it and you'd say it doesn't meet this. And then the WAC gives you guidance on how do I define a technical expert? How do I look at information that may come from a range of people? It's not just an agency study.
And you means if there's 5 checks here, it would have met all 5 checks.
Yes, and if on the blue one, so I was almost done, I was still if you are, monitoring data, there are 4 blue checks. So you would need to be able to say method, logical conclusions, good context, and references to be, yeah, that's credible and reliable. If you had quantitative analysis of statistics, all the better. right?
Mhm.
So each item, you know exactly what you're looking for and remove some of that subjectivity, but I like that it had information about what do you do with expert opinions? And it had information and value in peer review. And so I think it also acknowledges that point that I was making, that even if something maybe didn't come out of that as yes, it met the characteristics to be scientifically reliable and valid, it could still supplement that science. That maybe it couldn't pass all of this, but it does provide some information that you can consider and supplement in. So that's that example that they have is, we saw a grizzly bear in this area. Well, that's not a scientific study, but knowing that they're present, if you're assessing their habitat, that's helpful to know someone saw them, right? It kind of describes that. So I feel like there's more guidance about, and less subjectivity on how you would look at the science, where EPA's is a little bit more subjective because you're looking at questions and writing responses, so there's just naturally more interpretation. And then Plemish, the international one, that's just a ranking, so it kind of is what it is.
Yeah, this is the first touch. This is for you to be asking questions, there's your thoughts, give me some reaction. It's going to be technical committee, we've heard the comments, it's going to be a comments review. You have a chance to give comments back after this meeting as well for the remainder of the 2 weeks. But as you look at it now, are there thoughts, reactions? Did you have some more material you want to share?
No, I mean, we'll end up, after this, we'll look at this compiled list and we'll talk about it, but this is the last piece of the 3 methods. So really, so where we want to come is any input or thoughts you guys have. Our goal would be that by next month, we're coming back and saying we've heard from the community, we've heard from the executive, we particularly heard from the technical committee, again with their technical expertise, and we've landed on a method that then in the proviso report we would describe this process, the basis of the method, and that how we envision it would be used in phase 2 in the EIS to get us to taking an action.
Applying the state criteria, is it simply the WAC or that provides the detail? Obviously, this is a high-level summary, or is there some kind of guidance document that describes how to apply it?
There isn't an additional guidance document. There is just the WAC in the Growth Management Act. However, just a little bit of searching online, and we're able to find how the city of Seattle has used it, how various counties have used it, and how Ecology and WVFW has used it. So there's examples of other government entities or agencies to see how they have implemented. But there isn't an additional paper or anything specifically on that.
Did you provide this committee, the WAC?
Yeah, the original sources, the WAC included, are all on DES's website. And so we've just pulled out in PDF that portion of the WAC that has the supporting descriptions of each characteristic, and it has the table. And similarly, the original EPA guidance document and the peer review paper from the international method are all there so that someone could look at them in their entirety and not just our presentation of them.
Other thoughts, questions?
Okay.
And then I've got one. On EPA, we have to go back to if it was chosen as the method of criteria for the assessment. So I looked at a particular survey or research, and the soundness is the purpose of the study reasonable and consistent with this design? The answer is pretty much, but I have this question. It seems like this is less black and white about whether it's in or out.
That's right. That's that more subjectivity because it's somewhat open-ended questions that allow the reviewer to say, I think this or I think that, where the tabular, can it meet this, can it meet that, provides a little bit more, yes it does, no it doesn't.
It may be a judgment call of some sort, whether it gets a check mark.
Yes.
But if it gets a check mark, then the check marks add up.
Exactly.
It gets past the test into.
It's credible and reliable. Exactly.
Okay. Give me a minute or two to look this over and think before we are ahead of the not going to rush us.
So this is the first touch I'm looking at this, and we need to have something back, I mean, if I'm looking at the bottom of this page here, the cover sheet, then we have to have something back by June 2nd.
That would be great. It allows us then, when we come back to you to do the second touch, to kind of close this, we're able just to say, here's what everyone heard, and like we did today, here's what it looks like now based on everyone's input.
So again, on this one, we're gonna be looking at saying which one of these three do we want to identify and report as saying phase 2 should be used as the criteria. So if you have thoughts to understand any of them, or if you have some questions about them,
Let us know.
thoughts about the credibility, or want to ask about how they're used, so you can get to that point of having that opinion. We'll be hearing from the public, we've heard from the technical committee. I don't know, we're going to be as a table, so I'm going to say which one of these do we want to identify.
The chair said the technical advisory committee recommends the first one, the state.
Yeah, overall, that was their consensus. And similar to everyone, they have until the 2nd to get more information to us as well. So if they review and have additional comment, but that was kind of their initial recommendation, yes. And what we would bring forward into the proviso report, well, you all will see the draft proviso report, again, is here's what the proviso and the DS work plan charged us to do, charged us as a whole. We reviewed and looked for these elements in identifying criteria for best available science, and this is what we landed on. And so we would bring forward that method, the WAC or whatever it is, and describe its anticipated use in an EIS. So on that note, what we wanted to do to make this the most useful we can for the EIS, because again, the one, without a question, shared out is everyone wants to secure funding, get into the EIS so we can take an action. And the more we can streamline that process and shorten the EIS process, all the better. So this, even though it's going into the proviso report and that may not feel very shiny and exciting, it absolutely helps the EIS process. And so what we wanted to do is, instead of just identifying the method, compile the science so that the EIS team, when there is funding, kind of hits the ground running, that they know what they're looking at, and that we're using the time we have with you guys, with the community and the technical committee, to solicit input from folks that know what's out there better than we do. So we took our initial stab at a table, and what we've done in this is we've pulled out technical documents or studies or reports around water quality and habitat and provided a brief summary. And by no means did this initial table in our minds capture everything. It was the starting place to solicit for more information. So we pulled from some websites, but we didn't scour everyone's website out there and see what information we had. So what I want to touch on is the italicized text at the top, the verbiage there, and what we heard from the technical committee around that, and then talk about the technical committee's additional documentations or some reports that they were willing to provide to us and send to us to augment this. This table is also, along with all the materials, publicly available as of last Thursday, with the question of the community that if they have additional reports or studies relative to water quality or habitat, kind of as we've defined, please send them to us and they'll make it on the list. So that again, this is part of the proviso report and the starting place of the EIS. Okay, so what we first say in italics is these documents provide science related to water quality and habitat and would be relevant to the evaluation of long-term management options and the impacts of retaining or removing the dam per the proviso. We can, Pete, with your comment in our summary graphic for the VAS, best available science, and on this, clarify, how it would be used or for the EIS process. What we initially said, our first stab, was technical studies regarding water quality, include those from the entire watershed to capture water bodies affecting or affected by Capitol Lake. That allows us to appropriately bring in Bud Inlet reports or information and the Deschutes watershed. We have not put a firm geographical boundary. We're going X far into the inlet or the watershed or anything like that at this time. And then for habitat, right below, we said habitat, and I read this, is inclusive of habitat for fish, wildlife, and other aquatic organisms, and includes other information relevant to habitat, such as invasive species. Because clearly that's a really key piece for the future of Capitol Lake and what options do what for providing recreational opportunities or how they may impact. One of the things we heard from the technical committee was we did provide that geographic boundary when we described water quality, right, the entire watershed, but we didn't with habitat. So we'll tweak this. You'll get to see it revised to try to do a better job of that, that basically it's, the intent would be, and of course with your input, that it's technical studies that are really watershed wide for both habitat and water quality, that it's not just the lake basin or Percival Cove, it's the lower Deschutes feeding into that, it's Butt Inlet. Again, we're not going to say exactly how far, that's a hard boundary or line to draw, and we can be flexible. The other points, we're kind of questioning, gosh, water quality, would you include water quantity? And that's something we hadn't thought about. So Ecology might be sending us some reports about the quantity of water. And I really don't know more, to be honest, than that with that question, but we'll see what we get. We're already starting to get some information. We had good input as well from folks around a coho recovery plan and some habitat studies that would be great to augment this. Some of the city government officials and Thurston County and Olympia and Tumwater, all three had different ideas on work that LOT has done or each entity has done that we just aren't aware of or have access to. And so folks were saying they were willing to send us some of those reports. And again, what you'll also see is we've listed the technical studies chronologically. So some of the most recent documents are at the top. And then at the bottom, some of these things go all the way back to the 70s. We have a larger list where, for example, there are sometimes a technical report in draft form and then it's in final form, and we said, well, we're not including the draft because it went final, or this was superseded, that was a quarterly update report, and then they did an annual. So there's things like that. We tried to make sure that we had appropriate level of what superseded something else. But there's good work that's older that isn't necessarily discounted, so we've included that as well. And I think some stakeholder groups have already shared information that we're able to bring into this too. That's definitely our intent. And it's really just, working to be, again, that repository starting place for the EIS. DES has done a good job collecting quite a bit of material on their website, but at this point, there hasn't been the scouring from the local cities or governments for things that they have. The tribe has some information, I think stakeholder groups, so we're kind of just pulling it together. And then this will be in that proviso report again.
So just to be clear about what you just said about this, is that not everything is in this list, but there's still more things to be added here from people around this table as well as other stakeholders.
Exactly.
So this list is actually going to grow to be a little bit more complete than what it is.
Yes. And we definitely intended and are planning on that, and that's its goal, is to take advantage of this process to solicit and compile, so that again, when we come back in second touch for best available science, we'll be able to report out what we heard from the community around that, to have a list that I think is safe to say substantially longer from what we're getting from folks, so you would see that increased size of the list, and then largely, if there is consensus, land on a method. Yeah.
Any questions, reactions?
So that list would be screened using best available science methodology?
That's right.
In phase 2.
In phase 2.
No one's part of this.
So anything that anybody sends you is on the list now?
Unless it was not at all related to water quality and habitat. We haven't seen anything yet that would be, I guess, I wouldn't want to say anything. I'd have to pass a straight face test, of we haven't seen anything that wouldn't be appropriate to put on the list. And we could solicit information if there was anything in a gray area that we were wondering if we should add. But right now, compiling everything is where the EIS process would start anyway. So what we're doing is teeing ourselves up. We're not screening the material against the method in part. We've got a condensed time frame to get all this done for the proviso report. But also, we don't have a sense of if the EIS is next year, if there's funding, or if there's not funding, if it's a couple years, in which you would be adding to the list, or you would be doing additional screening of any new information between that time. So we're getting everything together to facilitate that happening as efficiently as possible in phase 2.
I have a question, it's not a suggestion, just reaction. The title might imply that these have been determined to be best available
Yeah.
science.
That
So
they've already
maybe
completed.
would it be more accurate to say, this is the document review concerning water quality, habitat for development, or identification of best available science in an EIS?
Definitely.
So that this doesn't judge it, it presents document.
And that's what I want clarification on. This is just a presentation of documents. We're not screening or going through this list or anything else.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Very good.
Maybe we could explain that in there. Because Alex explained well, but that there will be assessed by a certain criteria in the EIS process.
I would also suggest that that at the beginning of this speech, when we talk about that language actually is bigger than what's actually being presented, knowing that this is just a draft piece of it. But I think it's important for people to know that if the work has not been screened or passed or has filtered, for lack of a better word, we need to make that very, very clear. You're getting to see everybody's work regardless, and that it will go through a filtering process and we get the EIS.
That makes sense, definitely. So next month, really quick, and then any input you have on anything. So next month, we would be coming back with the larger list, like I said, from building from the input from folks, likely a recommended or selected methodology that is a pretty quick touch. Here's the input. We're going to tell you what we heard from the community as well and the results of the survey. We think we landed on this method, and here's a new table. That's relatively focused and brief touch. That's where we feel like we can accommodate reviewing the draft purpose and need statement as well. So we will next month do second touch on this. We will review that purpose and need statement, that draft, and then we do the first touch on hybrid options. And so it's kind of a preview to next month, but the exact proviso language that we are meeting this element next month is identify multiple hybrid options for future management of capital lake, which options must include substantial improvement in fish and wildlife habitat and ecosystem functions, maintaining a historic reflecting pool at the north end of the lake estuary, and adaptive management strategies. It's quite a mouthful. So what we will do next month is bring forward to you and focus on the hybrid options that have either already come out as part of the work that's been done in the last decade, or that the community has provided, because again, we were soliciting input on hybrid options since April to June. We had a 3-month window in case folks had good ideas, and there has been some hybrid options that have come forward. One of the presentations next month in our extended session together for executive work group is presentations of a hybrid. So next month we're going to focus on those hybrids, but we're going to set ourselves up for then in July we want to open it and look at the full range of options. The proviso really focuses on hybrids, which is great, but in July then we'll say, okay, here's the hybrids that we were able to learn and hear from people, and here's the full range of options, and start to review those and look at them relative to the goals we've worked on together in Figure 3, relative to the purpose and need statement. We've all also, by then, having our mind in habitat, water quality, and science. So we're kind of every month building off what we're doing. We're not, to get us, I guess, you know, even though we're not reviewing technical studies with the method yet, we're building off every month to set us up to review those options and again, be ready kind of for the EIS. But, so that's next month.
Questions, thoughts about what we just heard or where we are with ahead? And any other thoughts on your first touch on the best available science material?
I really appreciate the historical data. That's really, I think that's important for all of us to recognize and realize how long we have been pontificating on this this great adventure that we're all a part of. And you have really done a great job in encapsulating that, putting that together. That is a document that we should all have in our back pockets, because it shows us the history and it gives us repeatedly directions and also studies on studies that come to a I think very good conclusions and stuff. So good job on that. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I'd add is I know that in Tumwater we've done a variety of stormwater studies, not just other jurisdictions have as well. And I know there's even been, I think, a ranking of the streams in this part of Thurston County in terms of their quality and habitat. There's quite a bit of information from the stormwater side of things that isn't here as well. And I would assume the board spent a lot of work on sediment characterization. None of that's reflected here.
We would be happy to take it all. I mean, really, taking all of it and putting this table is a very efficient use of this process. Again, it will just increase that efficiency in phase 2. We have provided the technical committee members a share file link where they can upload reports for us so that it makes it easier for them to transmit. So we can provide that to you folks as well. Just if you or another person on your staff can send us the reports, we're more than happy to take them in any form and add them here.
So, just to be clear, they cannot upload at this particular point, but they will be soon.
Yeah, I can, we'll email you that site probably by early next week. I just have to, our tech editor does magical things with how a link allows you to upload everything, so. Yes, that seems the easiest for you, then you don't have to worry about file size or reducing or, it's just dumping it kind of, and we get a notification when something's new, so we can go grab it.
We good on this?
Good piece of work.
Anybody have any thoughts before we move on to our updates? Chris, update on open meetings of the subcommittee.
Yeah, this has been a discussion among us for a little while, and I just wanted to bring it back upon a decision that we just made in consultation with all of you. And we're going to be opening the technical committees up for public observation. So I want to make sure that I'm really, really clear about what that is. It's not public input, it's public observation. And as you know, our technical committees are very heavily tasked with going over a lot of information and noting the compacted time schedule that we have. It's very important for us to make sure that they have the necessary time and resources available so they can do their work and make sure that they come back with great recommendations for this committee. Having said that, we want to make sure that if there's public observation, that it's not, it actually does not interfere with the work of the technical committee. So there'll be some rules put together about public observance. We obviously don't want that observance to be disruptive. And DES also reserves the right to end public observation if it becomes a problem with making sure that the committee can carry on their work. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that announcement, that DES is making this decision based upon recommendations and consultation with everybody around this table. I just wanted to make that known and that, make sure that everybody knows that we made that decision.
Any questions, comments?
Does that apply to the funding and governance?
We're still taking that under consideration, so we haven't reached a decision on that yet.
I'd like to thank you for doing that, because I think that it's just going to add to the process without, but I think that you're right in reserving the right to, if it gets to be too much of a disruption to the committee, and I don't know what that disruption might be, but I think that just letting the public hear what's being discussed so that they can absorb, and then they have the opportunity at these other public comment milestones every month to come back and give comment at some of the presentations. So I think that they have a venue in which to do that, but at least being able to hear what's being discussed is an important part of this. So they keep informed.
See any other comments? Update on funding and governance committee, Bob.
We had a really great kickoff meeting on May 17th with the Funding and Governance Committee. And just, I'm hoping as part of this that you all have had a chance on the executive work group to connect with your Funding and Governance Committee members. If you haven't yet, highly advise you do that. I think it is going to be very important that you guys stay connected as we're progressing through this. The purpose of our first meeting was really to launch the committee, help everybody understand their roles and responsibilities, present the process. Not everybody had been fully, involved in this as you are with the executive work group or with the technical committee members. So we're getting everybody up to speed, so we're starting out on a good foundation. It was also really beginning to identify, looking at the different funding models, conceptual models, and governance. So one of the first things that we did in this meeting was really to set the foundation and go through the provisos, the very specific provisos that this committee is looking at. And just to refresh you guys in regard to those provisos, it's item E, which is identify conceptual options and degree of general support for shared funding by state, local, and federal governments and potentially other entities. And item F, identify one or more conceptual options for long-term shared governance of future management plan, including consideration of an option similar to lake management districts or shellfish protection districts, and it references the chapters of the RCW on both of those. So I think it was a great meeting. Everybody was encouraged to really think creatively. This isn't something where there's a defined checklist of this is what you're looking at. This isn't a process where the employee Snyder's bringing in and say, well, here are your alternatives. I mean, this isn't us activity and the members participating and really thinking through, what are those conceptual types of models? What are those ideas? And coming together as a team to identify those types of concepts. We made a lot of progress. We also reached general agreement on a template and approach of how we can start to gather that kind of information, gather feedback. There were considerations given as to, depending on the conceptual funding model or conceptual governance, it could be different depending on whether that's a lake, whether it's estuary, whether it's something in between. So we got our heads around what might that look like and how we start to gather information and have those discussions. That information, I've seen a rough draft of that. DES is working with the Snyder team. And we're going to be getting it back out to the members shortly. And we'll probably pre-populate just with like a one-liner on each of those just to kind of give a general sense or an example of how that might work to get those creative pieces going. So I expect we're going to have a great second meeting, and we're going to be getting some real creative and fun discussions of what kind of conceptual alternatives are we looking at. I think the key with this is it really is that element of these are conceptual. This isn't choosing a model, whether it be governance or funding. These are conceptual models. and look into that element of the degree of support of those types of models that we can move down the path. I think that those are the primary areas.
So what I'm hearing you say is that this first meeting was about organization and getting, the proper administration of what the committee's going to do.
It was, I think we made more progress than what we anticipated in the first meeting. We, talked about things of what, the proviso specifically called out lake management districts or shellfish protection districts. Not to say go use those or evaluate whether we can apply that, because they aren't directly applicable. But it was to frame up a model or concepts and to get those ideas going. There were also comments and discussions made about, what have people seen or experienced in regard to different ways to fund things like this, different ways that they've seen other entities govern things like this. So there were some action items that different members of the committee took to follow through on, and again, those will come back and help to really populate that matrix in the conversation we'll have in our next meeting. But yes, the intent was, let's stand this up, let's get everybody on the same page, and let's organize ourselves in a way that we can be successful in down that.
Other questions, thoughts? So we would have.
Date,
Oh, sorry.
next meeting date?
I don't have that with me right now.
No, I have the cheat sheet. I think
Thank
it's,
you. I think it's a general range. I don't know if
oh,
that's
it is,
on
if the next range would be between June 17th and the 23rd.
Karen, do you have, it's like the second Tuesday each month, I don't have a specific date.
We can kick that out in an update.
Yeah.
And what we expect is that in the future, during the work remember, we might have
June 21st. Okay, June 21st, so the next meeting.
we might have a more substantive report as things go along of some sort, as the group has its discussions.
Absolutely.
So we do plan to kind of loop in the work here. Okay? Any other questions, thoughts?
Just, I guess I do have a question for the members. Have you all had an opportunity to connect with your representatives on the planning and governance committee yet?
I have not, it's on my calendar.
Okay, outstanding.
Okay. On the agenda, I see it's next steps. I think this is Paul's test, if you've been paying attention. First thing is, we're ending a little early, but at noon we will come back together again and have presentations from noon until 2. You have a schedule. Open meeting, public invited to observe as well. There is a cafeteria on the second floor. For those of you who didn't bring lunch or don't want to go out to get, if you'd like to get lunch there. That will be a series of presentations at the table. So we'll kind of move ourselves around so folks can join us. And what we plan to schedule a certain amount of time that builds in about a 5-minute question and answer at the end. And presenters may take questions as we go along as well. We'll give us designated time to transition so we can move efficiently through the 4 on their own schedule for the day. Now, what happens after that is next month, look for the purpose and need statement be coming back as the final closure of the.
Yeah, I would say, maybe before we quite go there, my action item is we will get shared file links, so you guys can upload any documents. We greatly appreciate that. The community meeting is next Wednesday, the 1st. I will unfortunately miss it, but Christina Martinez and Carrie and other folks will be there. So Wednesday night. Then Thursday the 2nd ends our 2-week online kind of, it's not as much a survey this time, it's just questions and solicitation or requests for any additional reports and data. So, on Best Available Science, yes. So if you have anything, again, we would take it from you guys after that if you found something or thought of something after, but that's our 2-week period from the community so that we can incorporate everything before we meet again. Additionally, if you guys have any comments on the figure 3 in particular, by next Thursday, we'd love to have them. And then Paul's exactly right. Next month, you'll see the draft purpose and need statement. And that's a meaty one, so we will email you the materials like we have for the June meeting on the Thursday that they go live to the public, that we meet with the technical committee. Those materials would be provided to the executives. Our one request would be, if you do have a chance just to read the purpose and need statement before the meeting we would have, that would be fantastic. It's less than a page, but just to kind of have your mindset around that. And then we'll plan on walking through that together, and also I'll show example purpose and needs. We'll do the second touch on best available science, and we'll also provide a summary of both the community meeting next week and kind of a summary of the additional technical studies that have come in our process, from technical committee, anything you find, and also the general public. And then first touch on IDing hybrids.
Can I ask one thing? I have here for me two agendas for this afternoon, and they're both different. And I'm wondering if when we do these agendas, if we could date them so that we know which is the most current. So I can't tell by looking at them, and I know I had the same thing for this morning's agenda. There were two different ones, and there were different ones.
Adjustments for the one you did this morning.
Yeah, so I just appreciate dates on them so I know which one is the current.
And so, make sure we have thank you for the suggestion. This afternoon, the agenda will start at noon with the Capital Lake and Puget Sound and analysis of the use and misuse of lead in the model, and that's with Dr. Milne. The change you find is the historical and architectural history presentations are later, so we're flipped to later. I request that we have some students joining us, and they thought they could join us for that time, and we're interested in that presentation. So the first two are flipped to later. Any other thoughts, suggestions?
I have one for committee members. At the last public input meeting, there was a suggestion that each of our participants' websites also carry the meeting dates and things. And so DES is bad on this one. We forgot to convey that to all of you as a request. And so Kurt Hart, sitting in the audience.
And just so you know, I'm working with your counterparts. I've already contacted the city of Olympia and Thurston County, and I've already talked to Jeff. I've talked to Pete, and I will also talk to Port Olympia, and we'll make sure that we get at least a link from your guys' pages over our page too, so that when you go, people look at your site, want to know about Capital Lake, there's a link that will get them over to our site, so we get the best available information.
Yeah, this is to make sure that meeting notices have the most wide dissemination, because I think we had one person that stepped forward at our last public meeting and said, I didn't find out about this meeting until this morning or something. And only going to the DES website, it wasn't available. I think it wasn't available on the Port's website.
I know we sent out to our email blast list twice, I think, this past week, information to make sure we covered it. So
Good, great. I think the more we can widely disseminate our meeting times and increase the amount of communication we have out to our public.
Okay. Anything else? I think lunch will be available in the executive room, maybe about 11:30 or so.
Yeah, it should be delivered in the next 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes, executive work group. Others, lunch upstairs on the second floor, or as you wish, and we will come back together again
Yeah, the cafeteria opens at 11:30.
at 11:30.
11:30.
We'll be,